Hey Cubs, before we get started with the Phantom Tollbooth today, I want us to revisit the question that I asked you on Monday. And I just want to pause and thank everybody who comments on and leaves their feedback and their answers about our read alouds and share reading. You guys have been awesome. In fact, last night, well, not last night, Sunday night, I went back and I gave you all a point for every comment you made on a morning meeting post, on a shared reading post, and on a read aloud post. So you got a dojo point from those things. And then yesterday when I went in, I gave you the remainder of your dojo prizes based on those points. So some of you guys, got like almost 100 points. So great job, and also thank you for really showing that you are engaging with the listening that you're doing, which is awesome. So thank you. But I asked you guys to look a couple of things. One thing I asked you to do was to make a prediction about the man, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But the other thing I asked you to do is to define what the word ignorance means, to look it up. Like, what does it mean? Mountains of ignorance, because that's important to know about, like, the demons that are lurking there. And Diley says it means that you don't know something. Henry says it means lack of knowledge or information. And Mason said the same thing. Nishvita says the same thing. Srivatsa, Shreya, all say Sarvanch, Trinity, they all looked it up and they all saw that it said lack of knowledge. Now, Tanish did give an answer. It's not quite right, but it was a good guess. And thank you for responding. But ignorance means lack of knowledge or information. And I want us to look if the rest of the country, of the kingdom of wisdom, if the whole kingdom of wisdom is about knowledge, right? Like Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, like getting knowledge and experience the world, then it makes sense that the demons live in a place called mountains of ignorance, which means not the lack of knowledge or information, right? It's a place where there isn't a lot. And I want you to think about why, just for yourself, why you think Norton Juster would make the place where all the demons live be a place where there's not a lot of knowledge and information. Usually when we say that somebody or something is ignorant, which is like another form of ignorance, we say it because it's kind of a choice. They choose to not seek out information. When we think about someone, if someone says, hopefully no one will ever say you're being ignorant, but if someone ever says you're being ignorant, that means they're saying like you choose to not to, you have like a choice in almost lacking knowledge of information, or information, like you choose not to seek it out. So like you don't know it, but you're also not trying to learn it. So that's kind of an important thing too. Anyway, so I asked you to make a prediction about the man with no face. Like, what is your prediction? What do you think is going to happen? And the people who made a prediction, not everybody did, but Henry says he thinks the man is with no place is trying to get them to do more work for him. That's a good prediction. Srivatsa says, I think that the man is trying to waste their time and is a bad person. All right. Sarvanch says, I think the man is someone who did not want the princesses to come back, and that's why he is wasting their time. What great predictions. So let's go see what is happening, because remember, they're wasting hour after hour after hour after hour doing this work for the man with the no face, right? Because it's so tedious. So now we are going to look, we're going to start chapter 17, Unwelcoming Committee. Here we go. The humbug whistled gaily at his work, for he was never as happy as when he had a job which required no thinking at all. After what seemed like days, he had dug a hole scarcely large enough for his thumb. Talk shuffled steadily back and forth with the dropper in his teeth, but the full well was still almost as full as when he began, and Milo's new pile of sand was hardly a pile at all. How strange, said Milo, without stopping for a moment. I've been working steadily all this time, and I don't feel the slightest bit tired or hungry. I could go right on the same way forever." "Perhaps you will," the man agreed with a yawn. At least it sounded like a yawn. "Well, I wish I knew how long it was going to take." So he whispered it. Oops, I gotta go back and reread that. "Well, I wish I knew how long it was going to take," Milo whispered as the dog went by again. And I'm going to see who said this. Oh, Talk does. Couldn't remember. "Why not use your magic staff and find out?" replied Talk, as clearly as anyone with an eyedropper in his mouth could. Anyone could with an eyedropper in his mouth. Milo took the shiny pencil from his pocket and quickly calculated that at the rate they were working, it would take each of them 837 years to finish. "Pardon me," he said, tugging at the man's sleeve and holding the sheet of figures up for him to see, "but it's going to take 837 years to do these jobs." "Is that so?" replied the man without even turning around. "Well, you'd better get on with it then." "But it hardly seems worthwhile." "But it hardly seems worthwhile," said Milo softly. "Worthwhile!" the man roared indignantly. "All I meant was that perhaps it wasn't too important," Milo repeated, trying not to be impolite. "Of course it's not important," he snarled angrily. "I wouldn't have asked you to do it if I thought it was important." And now he turned to face them, and he didn't seem quite so pleasant. "Then why bother?" asked Talk, whose alarm clock suddenly began to ring. "Because, my young friends," he muttered sourly, "what could be more important than doing unimportant things? If you stop to do enough of them, you'll never get to where you're going." He punctuated his last remark with a villainous laugh. Now it's your turn. You heard mine. Why don't you guys do, for a moment, your villainous laugh? Yes. So, very good. So we keep in mind that, what is he saying? What if you do enough of them, you'll never get to where you're going? Ooh. "Then you must," gasped Milo. "Quite correct," he shrieked triumphantly. "I am the terrible trivium, demon of petty tasks and worthless jobs, ogre of wasted effort, and monster of habit." The humbug dropped his needle and stared in disbelief while Milo and Talk began to back away slowly. "Don't try to leave," he ordered with a menacing sweep of his arm, for there's so very much to do, and you still have over 800 years to go on the first job." "But why do only important things?" asked Milo, who had suddenly remembered how much time he spent each day doing them. "Think of all the trouble it saves," the man explains, and his face looked as if he'd been grinning an evil grin. If he could grin at all. "If you only do the easy and the useless jobs, you'll never have to worry about the important ones, which are so difficult. You just won't have... I'm sorry, let me go back. You just won't have the time. For there's always something to do to keep you from doing what really should be... For there's always something to do to keep you from what you should really be doing. And if it weren't for that dreadful magic staff, you'd never know how much time you are wasting." So I want you to think about that. For there's always something to do to keep you from what you should really be doing. And if it... Right? And also, if you only do the easy and useless jobs, you'll never have to worry about the important ones, which are so difficult. Which I gotta think about that as a lesson for this chapter. As he spoke, he tiptoed slowly toward them with his arms outstretched and continued to whisper in a soft, deceitful voice. "Now do come and stay with me. We'll have so much fun together. There are things to fill and things to empty, things to take away and things to bring back, things to pick up and things to put down. And besides all that, we have pencils to sharpen, holes to dig, nails to straighten, stamps to lick, and ever so much more. Why, if you stay here, you'll never have to think again. And with a little practice, you can become a monster of habit too. They were all transfixed by the Trivium's soothing voice. But just as he was about to clutch them in his well-mannered fingers, a voice cried out, "Run, run!" Milo, who thought it was Talk, turned suddenly and dashed up the trail. "Run, run!" it shouted again, and this time Talk thought it was Milo and quickly followed him. "Run, run!" it shouted again, and this time Talk thought it was Milo. It urged once more, and now the humbug, not caring who said it, ran desperately after his two friends with the terrible Trivium close behind. This way, the voice called again. They turned in its direction and scrambled up the difficult, slippery rocks, sliding back at each step almost as far as they'd gone forward. With a great effort and many helping paws from Talk, they reached the top of the ridge at last, but only 2 steps ahead of the furious Trivium. Over here, advised the voice, and without a moment's hesitation they started through a puddle of sticky ooze, which quickly became ankle deep, then knee deep, then hip deep, until finally they were struggling along through what felt like very much a waist deep pool of peanut butter. So think about what it would be like to try to go through like a waist deep pool of peanut butter. It'd be pretty hard, right? The Trivium, who had discovered a mound of pebbles which needed counting, followed no more, but stood at the edge, shaking his fist, shouting horrible threats, and promising to rouse every demon in the mountains. Yikes. What a nasty fellow, gasped Milo, who was having great difficulty just getting his legs to move. I hope I never meet him again. I believe that he stopped chasing us, said the bug, looking back over his shoulder. It's not what's behind us what worries me, remarked Talk as they stepped from the sticky mess, but what's ahead. Keep going straight, counseled the voice as they continued to pick their way carefully along the new path. Now step up, it recommended, and almost before they knew it, what had happened, they had all taken a step up and plunged to the bottom of a deep, murky pit. But he said up, complained Milo bitterly from where he lay sprawling. Well, I hope you didn't expect to get anywhere by listening to me, said the voice gleefully. We'll never get out of here, the humbug moaned, looking at the steep, smooth sides of the pit. That's quite an accurate evaluation of the situation. It says coldly. I gotta go back and say it coldly. That's quite an accurate evaluation of the situation, said the voice coldly. Then why did you help us at all? Shouted Milo angrily. Oh, I do as much for anybody, he replied. Bad advice is my specialty. For as you can plainly see, I'm the long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, big-footed monster. And, if I do say so myself, one of the most frightening fiends in this whole wild wilderness. With me here, you won't dare to escape. And with that, he shuffled to the edge of the pit and leered down at his helpless prisoners. Talk and the humbug turned away in fright, but Milo, who had learned by now that people are not always what they say they are, reached for his telescope and took a long look for himself. And there at the rim of the hole, instead of what he expected, stood a small furry creature with very worried eyes and a rather sheepish grin. Why, you're not long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, or big-footed, and you're not at all frightening, said Milo indignantly. What kind of demon are you? The little creature, who seemed stunned at being found out, leaped back out of sight and began whimpering. Ah, I'm the demon of insincerity, he sobbed. I don't mean what I say. I don't mean what I do, and I don't mean what I am. Most people believe what I tell them go the wrong way and stay there. But you and your awful telescope have spoiled everything. I'm going home. And crying hysterically, he stamped off in a huff. Well, it certainly pays to have a good look at things, observed Milo as he rapped at the telescope with great care. Now all we have to do is climb out, said Talk, placing his front paws as high on the wall as he could. Here, hop up on my back. Milo climbed up on the dog's shoulders. Then the bug crawled up both of them, and, by standing on Milo's head, just managed to hook his cane on the root of an old gnarled tree. With loud complaints, he hung on doggedly, while the other two had climbed out over him and pulled him up, somewhat dazed and discouraged. I'll lead the way for a while, he said, brushing himself off. Follow me, and we'll stay out of trouble. He guided them up along one of the 5 narrow ledges, all of which led to a groove and rutted plateau. They stopped for a moment to rest and make plans. Oh, there's them trying to get out, right? But before they had done either, the whole mountain trembled violently and with a sudden lurch rose high into the air. The whole mountain trembled violently and with a lurch rose high into the air, carrying them along with it, for quite accidentally they had stepped onto the calloused hand of the gelatinous giant. What do we have here? He roared, looking curiously at the tiny figures huddled in his palm and licking his lips. He was an incredible size, even sitting down, with long, unkempt hair, bulging eyes, and a shape hardly worth speaking of. He looked, in fact, very much like a colossal bowl of jelly without the bowl. How dare you disturb my nap? He bellowed furiously, and the force of his hot breath tumbled them over in his hand. We're terribly sorry, said Milo meekly when he'd untangled himself, but you look just like part of the mountain. Naturally, said the giant, replied in a more normal voice, but even this was like an explosion. I have no shape of my own, so I try to be like whatever I'm near. In the mountains, I'm a lofty peak. On the beach, a broad sandbar. And in the forest, a towering oak. And sometimes in the city, I'm a very handsome 12-story apartment house. I just hate to be conspicuous. It's really not safe, you know. And then he looked at them again with hungry eyes and wondered how well they'd taste. You look much too big to be afraid of anything, said Milo quickly, for the giant had already begun to open his mouth wide. Look, there he is. I'm not, he said with a slight shiver that ran down his gelatinous body. I'm afraid of everything. That's why I'm so ferocious. If all the others found out, I'd die. Now, do be quiet while I eat my breakfast. He raised his hands toward his gaping mouth, and the humbug shut his eyes tightly and clapped both of his hands on his head. Then you aren't really a fearful demon, Milo asked desperately, on the assumption that the giant had been brought up well enough not to talk with a mouthful. Well, approximately, yes, he replied, lowering his arm to the vast relief of the bug. That is, comparatively, no. What I mean is relatively, maybe. In other words, roughly, perhaps. What does everyone else think? Here, you see. There, you see, he said peevishly. I'm even afraid to make a positive statement. So please stop asking questions before I lose my appetite altogether. And then he raised his arm again and prepared to swallow the 3 of them in one gulp. Then why don't you help us rescue Rhyme and Reason? Then maybe things will get better, shuddered Milo again. This time almost too late, for in another instant they would have been all gone. Oh, I wouldn't do that, said the giant thoughtfully, lowering his arm once more. I mean, why not leave well enough alone? That is, it'll never work. I wouldn't take a chance. In other words, let's keep things as they are. Changes are so frightening. and as he spoke, he began to look a bit ill. "Maybe I'll just eat one of you," he remarked unhappily, "and save the rest for later. I don't feel very well." "I have a better idea," said Milo. "You do?" interrupted the giant, losing any desire to eat at all. "If it's one thing I can't swallow, it's ideas. They're so hard to digest." "I have a box full of ideas, of all the ideas of the world," said Milo, proudly holding up the gift King Azaz had given him. The thought of it terrified the giant, who began to shake like an enormous pudding. "Put me down and just go away," he pleaded, forgetting for a moment that he was the one who had a hold of whom. I'm sorry, let me reread that again. "Put me down and just go away," he pleaded, forgetting for a moment who had a hold of whom. "And please don't open that box." In another moment he'd set them down on the next jagged peak, and with panicked eyes, and his eyes, lumbered off to warn the others of this terrible new threat. But the news travels quickly. The word snatcher, the trivium, the long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-nosed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, big-footed monster had already spread the alarm throughout the evil and unenlightened mountains. And out the demons came, from every crack and crevice, through every fissure and crack, from under the rocks and up from the mud, stomping and shuffling, slithering and sliding through the murky shadows. And all had only one thought in his mind: destroy the intruders and protect ignorance. From where they stood, Milo, Talk, and the humbug could see them moving steadily forward, still far away, but coming quickly. On all sides of the cliff were alive with its evil collection of crawling, looming, creeping, lurching shapes. Some could be seen plainly, others were dim-lit silhouettes. But still more, only now beginning to stir from their foul places, would be along much sooner than they were wanted. "We better hurry," barked Talk, "or they'll sure to catch us." And he started up the trail again. Milo took a deep breath and did the same, and the bug, now that he knew what lay behind, ran ahead with renewed enthusiasm. So our next chapter, chapter 18, is entitled Castle in the Air, which is very exciting because we know the castle in the air is where the princesses are. So in this chapter, our heroes come into contact with three demons. Well, one of them they had the terrible Trivium, who tried to get them to waste their time. The very insincere, and we're not going to repeat, long nose, green eyes, blue, 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 blue. And they also came with the gelatinous giant, right, who was going to eat them. So we've had three demons, and now all these other demons are following them, who want to keep ignorance the same, meaning they don't want to learn anything. That's right. And I want you to think about this sentence and tell me what you think it means. Or what do you think, I should say, what do you think Norton Juster wants you to learn from this thought? What do you think he wanted you to learn? If you only do the easy and useless jobs, you'll never have to worry about the important ones, which are so difficult. For there's always something to do to keep you from doing what you really should be doing. So I want you to think, what do you think that means? What the lesson that Norton Juster wants you to learn. All right? Thank you so much for listening to the Phantom Tollbooth with me.